So there's three ways in which we buy real estate. One is owner finance. Two is buying properties subject to the existing loan. And three is buying properties on a lease purchase or a lease option. So when I talk about owner finance, there's roughly a third of the properties in the United States that are debt-free. So these are sellers that are willing and able to become your bank. I know I just used that brief example of this property in Valdosta, Georgia. This student just got that first deal within 60 days of starting with us. And we were able to work with that particular seller, and they were interested in selling this property because they wanted a very specific purchase price. And because they wanted that specific purchase price, we were able to then create the terms of the agreement. So the monthly payment is relatively small compared to the purchase price on that property. Small $10,000 down payment on a $1.5 million house. So these are sellers that are willing to be your bank. So what you simply do is you're going to agree to create the terms of that agreement, and then you're going to close on it with a purchase and sale agreement. And that purchase and sale agreement I just have over here on the left-hand side as well, because really what's happening is, because there's no debt on the property, the title is going to transfer to your company, and then a new mortgage is going to be created that the seller is now holding the mortgage. They're going to become your bank, and now you're just making monthly payments to them until a time in which you're going to cash this property out. For the example that I'm using for that deal, we actually have a 10-year balloon on this property. So the seller needs to be cashed out in 10 years. Because I know you guys are actively doing deals, I'll stop in between each one of these techniques. So any questions specifically on owner finance? And then we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, I have a question. So you do 10-year balloon and the 30-year amortization. Is that kind of what you do standard?
So actually standard wise, if we were looking at owner financing deal, standard is 0% interest, principal only payments, somewhere between 5 and 10-year balloon. When you start getting out into like the 7, 10-year, 20, 30-year, there tends to then seller is going to look for an interest rate. And if we were to do an interest rate, it's very likely a yes. It's going to be a 30-year, sometimes even a 40-year amortization, which would allow that monthly payment to go down in order to you'd be able to create more of a spread. Yes, so let me give you another example. So we bought a property, actually it happens to be in Georgia again. It's just happened to be two recent deals we're doing. This seller, this property went through probate because the husband actually owned the piece of property. The husband died. He didn't have a will set up, so the property had to go through probate. Debt-free property. When one of our students approached that seller, what we ended up structuring was 2 years of 0% interest, so 2 years of principal only payments. Then from there, it moved to a 3.5% interest rate, 30 amortization with a 15-year balloon. So there's within creative financing, I'm just giving you two completely different options there. Within creative financing, it's really about solving a problem. Because let's say that the second option I was talking about there, what the wife wanted, because she was actually going to put this property in a trust. What the wife wants is all she wants is just monthly cash flow without having to maintain a property. That property became a burden to her, became an asset to us. So we actually just recently closed on that property, making monthly payments while we go ahead and fill this property.
And there was a question. Are they able to get a copy of, if they want to get a copy of the purchase and sales agreement, should they get in touch with you or the one that you use in your business?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do it for your group. Yeah, normally you'd have to go get into our course, but I'd be happy to give it to you for your group. Yeah, just if you want to send me a message afterwards, I'll give you the copies you can distribute.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions on owner finance?
Cool. No, I'm monitoring the chat. Yeah, looks good, man.
All right, cool. The secondary way in which we buy creative financing is buying property subject to the existing loan. So when you buy a property subject to the existing loan, what it really means is you're approaching a seller, complete opposite of the first one. You're approaching a seller that has debt on the house, that has a mortgage. So what you then do is you would go ahead and close on the property. So title would transfer. So utilizing a purchase and sale agreement, you're going to close on it. And I know that if you're an experienced investor, you're sitting here telling me, no, there's many ways in which you can close on a property. If there's existing debt, you can do it with a purchase and sale, you can do it with a land contract, you can do it for a contract for deed and escrow. There's different ways that you could close on it with a trust. There's different ways in which you can structure it. But just to keep it simple here today, close on with a purchase and sale agreement. The mortgage remains attached to the seller's credit. So in this purchase sale agreement, it will have an existing loan section in it. And also when you go get the closing documents, on the HUD, it will also have you're closing on it subject to the existing loan. So that will remain attached to the seller's credit. And then you are contractually obligated to continue to make those monthly payments on the property until a time in which you're going to go ahead and pay off that loan. So you're making the monthly payments to the seller. You, because you hold title, are getting all the tax benefits associated with that property. And then you're just going to continue to make those payments. Which I'll share with you in a minute, how we exit, but we're going to go ahead and place our buyer in the house. We're going to collect the payments. We're going to then make the payments. And then we're going to now benefit from being the homeowner.
All right. A couple of questions. Ricky
sure
had a question. Is there, I'm sorry?
I say, I'm sure there is. This is usually what causes most questions.
No, I think it's about the previous one. Is there anything called like an option to extend a balloon payment?
Yeah, I mean, you can always renegotiate these deals consistently on any of these transactions. As soon as you're in them, absolutely. So when I'm going to share with you in a minute here what we would consider a lease purchase or a lease option, we have actually moved the lease option to a subject to deal quite often. Like we changed the agreement in the meantime. There's a deal, and let me see if there's a deal. Let me walk you through this. Let me see if I can find it here for a second. If I can find this deal for you real quick. And actually what happened was, as I searched for this thing, what happened was we bought a property. Here it is. We bought this property on owner finance. And I know I didn't walk you through the 3 paydays. So let me not to overwhelm you here. We bought this property for $183,000 with a 48-month balloon payment. You can see that in the bottom left-hand corner. No money down, a $923 a month principal only payment. Okay. What we then did was during the course of this deal, we actually approached the seller roughly around, the holidays. And we said, hey, we have some money coming in from another deal. If we went ahead and gave you, I believe it was $6,000, would you extend the balloon an additional year? So we did that for 2 years in a row, because we knew if we gave them 6, we were going to roughly make $12,000 to $14,000 based on cash flow, based on the principal pay down, because the $6,000 that we were giving them was going directly towards the mortgage balance. Then what we then did was we actually approached the seller and said, what happens if we gave you interest? Would you be open to extending this deal 15 years? The seller said, yep, we'd be interested in doing that. This ended up turning into a 21-year deal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep. All right. There are a couple of questions. Lane has a question. When purchasing sub 2, how does the seller get around having an existing mortgage that you took over if they are trying to get another mortgage?
Yeah, great question. So depending upon the seller, right? Buying a property subject to the existing loan, there's many reasons and why a seller would sell this way. Most of the time, the seller is going to be selling because they're in a financial bind. They're either behind on payments, there's no equity in the deal. So some of the sellers in which we buy from, we're not expecting that they're going to go get another loan. But let's assume that they do. So the seller that needs to go get another loan, when you close on this property, it's very likely you're going to have to utilize another technique or an instrument called like a wrap mortgage. Because what that will then do is that will show that that underlying debt is being paid and serviced. So when it showed that that's being paid and serviced, now that should come off of either 70 to 100% of that monthly payment should come off their debt to income ratio. It would be no different than if you had a rental property that a tenant was paying, you were able to show the tenant was paying, which then could come off your debt to income ratio. Does that make sense?
Cool. It does. Lane, do you have any follow-up questions to that? Nope. So good. And Kwaje, hey Kwaje, let me know if I'm mispronouncing your name. He said, how practical is it to wholesale sub 2?
How practical is it what? I'm sorry?
How practical is it to do wholesale deal using sub 2 financing?
I don't do wholesale deals. Quite frankly, if you're gonna put in the effort to do if you're gonna go put in the effort to put together a transaction, then why not try to hold the property and by buying it, creative financing, so you can create consistent income versus having to go look for another deal. Again, personal preference. Is it possible to wholesale a sub 2 deal? Yes. If I'm a buyer from the wholesaler though, like if you have a creative financing buyer, what you'd want to do, in my opinion, is to go get that creative financing buyer's agreement to buy it sub 2, because it's like, so myself, I wouldn't want to inherit another person's subject to agreement. It's because there are so many moving parts. So that would be how I would structure it.
So you would want to have your own, just make sure you kind of agreed to the terms. You're not agreed to somebody else's terms.
Yeah, because so we spent like tens of thousands of dollars, which I'm sure many of you have, on your agreements, and then try to get your attorney to review someone else's sub 2 agreement, especially because they're most likely a long-term deal. That would add another layer of complexity I wouldn't want.
Yeah. And Melvin has a question. Do you walk away from leads where the seller only wants cash only and they're not interested in any creative financing?
Me personally, yes. Yeah, that's all we do is creative financing deals. We're not cash buyers, we're not wholesalers, we're not fix and flippers.
If they specialize. I think the question is, like, if they want cash only, like, do you even make them an offer of seller financing? Or if they say, if we're not interested, you're just kind of, the lead is dead at that point.
So the way in which we would approach a seller, if they said, hey, no matter what, I only want cash and I only want retail and cash, that'd be the only time we wouldn't look at a deal.
Okay.
It's our personal preference not to go buy properties cash. So what we would do is we would just move that into our follow-up folder until their motivation is higher, where they're interested in doing something creative, or go ahead and refer it to somebody.
Cool. And one question I have is, let's say you close on a property subject to the deed is getting recorded at the recorder's office. Is that correct?
Yeah, the title, yes, title's being transferred. Absolutely.
And then who has the first lien on the property?
It would be the bank.
It would be the bank. And so have you had any situations where, the due on sale clause got triggered?
So that's the number one question I always get, right? When it comes to subject to deals. We've never had a due on sales clause be called. We've done many of these deals and never had one being called. It does not, I want to say this on record, it does not mean that they couldn't be called. There are other techniques. So let me give you an example. We are buying a lot of properties in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And there was a local bank there calling loans due. Like this is something we consistently see. There was a bank specifically doing that. So the attorney that we had in that area recommended we started buying properties on a contract for deed. So on a contract for deed, basically what's happening is that title really does not transfer until the final payment is made. But at least our accountant is willing to go ahead and bring the contract for deed property on our books so we can depreciate as if we're homeowners. So with that, that's the way we would approach if we knew that there was a lot of due on sales clause being called. But here's my, again, personal opinion. Based upon the current team that we have surrounded with us, the current investors that we're a part of, I'm sure if you ask this exact same question, like the family mastermind, people would give you very similar answers. And that is banks, in my opinion, don't care that much about a due on sales clause. What they care about is that they're making interest off of the mortgage that they wrote and that they have collateral, which would be the house, because they still be in personally in possession if somebody didn't make those payments. So you as the real estate investor, if you are making your payments on time, it's very unlikely the due on sales clause would be called. Now, I'll give you some additional stuff just because I know that we got some advanced people in here, and that is the way in which our attorneys suggest that we acquire these pieces of property is through a family trust. So if we go ahead and buy a property subject to, we'd buy it in a family trust that would be named the street address of the current property we're buying and the seller's last name family trust. So it'd be like 123 Jump Street, Smith Family Trust, with then the beneficiary being your LLC. Because the Garn-Saint-Germain Act of 82 states that property can be transferred for estate or tax planning purposes without a due on sales clause being called. So many people, like myself, move even their personal residence into a trust. So that's the way we do it. We have it set up in a trust. Again, this is an attorney. This is our attorney's suggestion. I'm not an attorney. In order to acquire it that way, because it just adds another layer of protection for you as the real estate investor. I know I went deep there.
I think you're up. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's what I've heard from other investors. Like they buy the property in a trust and then just, then it doesn't trigger that. So yeah, great. One last question is, when you're making the payment to the seller, are you making payment to the seller or are you making payment directly to the bank? Like, how do you make sure that the money that you're sending to the seller is actually paying the bank?
Yeah, I always make the payments directly to the bank. The only time we ever make a payment to the seller is if we're doing owner finance and they are our bank. We want to be able to control that. And sellers will ask about that. It happens. And the way we always explain it in a good script is, Mr. Seller, we buy a lot of real estate. It's a lot easier for you to have access to the mortgage so you can check on me versus me paying all of these sellers and checking on 30, 50, 100 properties every month in order to make sure that you guys are making the payments to the right place. So we always give them the ability to go ahead and check on us as far as that will make them comfortable if that's what they want. But the truth is, with most subject to deals, Sharad, we're actually improving their credit because they either stopped making payments or they're not in a good financial position to continue to make payments. And we've actually increased people's credit scores because we're making payments and it's still attached to their credit.
Nice. And are you using a third-party loan servicing company, or you're just like managing with your scale, you're managing everything in-house?
Yeah, we're managing everything in-house consistently. You can certainly use a service provider if you choose.
Cool. All right. No, man, great information so far.
Awesome. The other option in which we do is a lease purchase agreement. So also known as a lease option. Really, all this means is you utilize an agreement like a lease with an option to purchase real estate, and you really are controlling an asset without ownership. Because when you buy a property on a lease purchase, you're really just agreeing to a specific purchase price or an equity position in the property. And I can explain that when we go over maybe a case study here. An equity position on the property, you're agreeing to handle any and all responsibilities, including maintenance, mortgage, taxes, insurance, any and all future repairs. You're basically controlling that asset with the intent to go ahead and cash the seller out on and before a specific end date or before your option comes due. So it's control without ownership. A lot of new real estate investors utilize lease options to get involved in creative financing because it's really simple. There's no, a lot of the times in which we do these deals, there's really no attorneys involved. You can get it simply done through DocuSign and a lot of these because it's an option versus having to go through a closing process. Also, a lot of these deals are done with no money down and you just have full control over the asset. So you handle that through a lease purchase agreement or a lease with an option to buy.